Scott Lang, his daughter Cassie, and the Van Dynes all get sucked into the quantum realm and come across Kang the Conqueror in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Liam Neeson plays Raymond Chandler's famous hard-boiled detective in the new noir film, Marlowe, and a group of con artists decide to take on a billionaire family in Sharper. All this and more is being released this weekend. Hello guys, I am the Hick Critic here bringing you my opinions of the films that were just released. As always, keep in mind these are my own personal opinions. Feel free to check out any of the films that seem interesting to you. Alright guys, let's dive right in. Our first film tonight is Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, the newest film in the MCU catalog, and as much as I hate to admit it, I walked away from this film feeling pretty disappointed because while this film is watchable enough, it's also a mess. Following the events of Endgame, Scott Lang has been taking it easy, just enjoying life with the Van Dynes and his daughter Cassie. But after an experiment gone wrong, all 5 of them get sucked into the quantum realm and discover an entire civilization that they didn't even know was there, and it's ruled under the iron fist of the dangerous tyrannical Kang, who wants to escape the quantum realm by any means necessary, willing to crush anything and anyone who gets in his way. I think I can summarize what most of the problems with this movie are in one sentence. This feels like a pilot of a TV series that the main characters are not going to be in. This film feels more concerned about setting things up for the future of the MCU rather than actually telling a well-developed story within itself. The entire thing is just awkwardly paced, and okay, before I go into much further detail about what I didn't like, I want to take a second here to acknowledge what this film did right first, because I want to iterate that this isn't really a bad movie. What everyone is saying about the main villain Kang is absolutely 100% true. Jonathan Majors is perfectly cast as Kang the Conqueror. His presence is felt in pretty much every single scene he's in. And you really get the sense of how truly dangerous he is, and he has the potential to be an even greater villain than Thanos if handled properly. His presence in this film alone elevates it to the level that it ends up being. And it should be noted, for those wondering, the humor in this film is nowhere near as annoying or obnoxious as it was in Thor: Love and Thunder. The humor in this is a little bit better integrated and slightly more organic. Now granted, there are some moments where it does pop up at inopportune times, but it happened with a lot less frequency than in that film. And also, as a quick aside, the humor's really not that strong. I think I laughed like twice or so, but at the same time there weren't really any jokes that made me roll my eyes. And actually, I do like the relationship between Scott and Cassie. It actually does feel like they have a real father-daughter bond, and it's kind of a weird situation because, he's been gone for 5 years and didn't age, but she did, and so they're both kind of trying to wrap their heads around this bizarre predicament. The action scenes are alright, however, there is a fantastic sequence that takes place inside an orb where there's an endless number of Ant-Men that wind up forming and reforming endlessly and getting confused and fighting the real Scott Lang, and it's visually exciting. And the design of some of the characters in the quantum realm are creative, and I liked the character of Quaz, played by William Jackson Harper, the person who could read minds. His lines and his delivery were very well done, and I wish that he was in the film a lot more than he was. But, okay, that's pretty much most of the positives. What did I not like about it? To put it simply, the film is just overstuffed. There are so many moving parts, from the relationship between Scott and Cassie to trying to establish this new world and all the different characters within it, and the dynamic they have with Kong, and then they have to try to establish who Kong is and his backstory and how it ties in with Janet's time in the quantum realm, and then there's another villain from a previous Marvel film that winds up popping his head back around this time around even though he's completely unneeded, and then there's a theme that they try to clumsily weave into this film about how you shouldn't turn away when the little guy is in peril, and yeah, none of this flows together smoothly. This honestly feels like it should have been one of the Marvel miniseries, because it really felt like it had all these concepts that it wanted to explore, but they just didn't have the time to explore them properly or to flesh them out. Bill Murray is there to be Bill Murray for about 5 minutes, and that's it. He's there just to be there and adds nothing to the story. The pacing in this is so disjointed. At one point, there was a cut made that was so confusing, I actually thought that there was a reel missing. The writing in this is also so sloppy at times. There are so many little details that don't make sense the more you think about it. If Janet really was that concerned about who was in the quantum realm, then why was she privy to an experiment at the end of Ant-Man and the Wasp where Scott goes into the quantum realm? Is this a place where time truly has no meaning, as they say? Because aside from one scene, we get no evidence of any such thing happening here. Time seems to be flowing perfectly normal. And one character switches sides with absolutely no setup or real explanation. And in all honesty, it never really feels like the group ever forms into a cohesive unit this time around. Scott and Hope barely interact in this film, so their chemistry in the first two films isn't really here. And some of the character decisions, particularly that of Janet, feel so baffling here. It all feels so forced, like there was an arbitrary end goal that was set by Marvel, but they had no idea how to actually get there organically. Even the quantum realm itself doesn't really have that much character. It's mostly just CGI rocks and desert, and that's it. And the climax just feels more like a cacophony of colors rather than a rousing finale to get the blood pumping. I just didn't care what happened to this place. But with all that said and done, I guess I can say that the film is watchable. There wasn't really any moments that made me angry at it, and I mean, the film did just enough to keep my interest, but yeah, doing just good enough is not good enough, because we know what the MCU is capable of, and to them to just do the bare minimum here is disappointing. I wanted this to be better, I wanted this to be more fun, but it winds up feeling overstuffed, trying way too hard to set up the conflict for the upcoming Secret Wars film. I guess if you've been a Marvel fan up to this point, I can't really tell you to stay away because it is setting up a lot of important stuff to be dealt with later, but if you do go see it, might I recommend going to a matinee screening if you're able to. Just a thought. Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania gets a half-empty shot. Next up is Marlowe, a dry and unseasoned mess that is so bad and absolutely no two elements work together in harmony that you would think that Nicholas Holt's character in The Menu had made it. The film is a noir about a detective being hired to search for a missing man, which is actually based on a novel written by John Banfield called The Black-Eyed Blonde. And this is also the first film adaptation to include the Philip Marlowe character since 1978, about 45 years ago. So it is fair to say that maybe another film version of this character was due, but it could also be a sign that the character has kind of fallen out of the public eye by now. And I really hope this is not anyone's introduction to the character. Liam Neeson is an actor that I like and respect, but I don't think he was the right pick here. He seems completely lost and lacks the tough, I am half a second away from socking anybody who gives me lip veneer. Liam Neeson can play tough, but not Marlowe tough, and certainly not at the age he's at. It may seem unfair to compare Liam Neeson to Humphrey Bogart, but what can I say? When you've seen the perfect performance of the character already, it's hard not to compare the two. This whole entire film is pretty much Liam Neeson just going around from person to person, asking them questions, and then they'll tell them to go talk to someone else, and then he goes try to find that person. Lather, rinse, repeat, for like 2 hours. Oh, and occasionally they'll insert a poorly staged, poorly edited fight scene to try to keep the audience awake. Diane Kruger, Jessica Lange, and Alan Cumming are in this film too, and they're all wasted. They're given nothing to do and nothing to work with. Every single artistic decision that was made makes the film worse, and it also lessens its market appeal on top of it. The film should have been filmed in black and white. It would have instantly given the film character, and it could have better concealed the bad CGI to try to sell Barcelona as 1930s Los Angeles. The movie is rated R, not because the story demands that it be rated R. Yeah, with some minor trims, you could easily make this PG-13. I normally don't bring stuff like this up, except that Philip Marlowe is a character that's going to appeal a lot more to an older generation than to a younger generation. So you're curtailing a lot of your potential audience with material that, honestly, given the direction that the story goes, is completely superfluous. I guess it was worth it to hear like 20 F-bombs, see a naked woman mostly covered by money, and to see a guy snort some coke. Totally worth it. The film is shot and edited like a modern day film. Again, I don't think this was the right call. I think that Neil Jordan should have tried to emulate the style of the noirs of the golden age of Hollywood. It still wouldn't have saved the film, but at least it would have been an attempt to try to make this stand out, to try to give the film some personality. The dialogue in this is terrible. There seems to be an odd habit of characters repeating terrible lines, and someone will say, "Yes, I know, you just told me." I genuinely can't even tell if they're trying to copy Raymond Chandler's style of writing with the dialogue. And the one thing that was brought over from his original stories, his overly convoluted mysteries that are difficult to follow, was the one thing that shouldn't have been brought over. I could barely follow what was going on or what certain characters knew or where their allegiances were, and by the halfway point, I gave up, which is not helped by the film's disjointed pacing, where scene transitions happen so sloppily. By the time the mystery winds up getting revealed, the entire thing just deflates as you're left wondering, you mean that's it? The film's writing in this is so terrible, it seems to genuinely think that curtains are completely soundproof. Not windows, curtains. The only enjoyment I got out of this was completely ironic, watching the cast and crew fumble through something this bafflingly terrible. Marlowe gets an empty shot. Next up is the new Australian gay drama Of an Age, a film that actually has a pretty strong start, but by the end just fell apart for me. The film stars Elias Anton as Cole, a ballroom dancer who unexpectedly crosses paths with his friend's older brother Adam, played by Tom Green. No, not that one. And after he discovers that he's gay, starts to question his own sexuality as he feels a spark that he's never felt before. So, let's get into the nitty-gritty of what works, because, truth be told, if the film had stopped at about the 70-minute mark, it would have been an acceptable film. It might even be pretty good. The film's first and second acts take place entirely in 1999, which was a time period when homosexuality was a lot less socially acceptable than it is now. So right away, that small detail alone kind of creates this very subtle uneasiness and fear as the characters try to grapple with these feelings and desires during an era where they were taboo. The film was also shot in full screen, which I thought was a weird choice at first, but then I saw that a majority of this film is extreme close-ups of the two leads, which, when combined with the smaller aspect ratio, kind of creates this environment that blurs the line between claustrophobia and intimacy, which really serves this story well, mostly because for most of this film, Cole is still struggling with his sexual identity, almost as if he's trapped or ensnared by his desires. So it makes sense for these two elements to be almost interchangeable, especially for the time period that the story takes place. So yeah, it's a slowly paced but still compelling drama about a man slowly coming to grips with his sexuality. The performances are pretty good, especially Elias Anton, who communicates so much about what his character is going through with the subtlest of facial expressions. The opening 10 minutes creates a great sense of uncontrolled chaos with effective use of handheld camera to really add to the confusion, which contrast heavily with the softer and quieter scenes between the two guys, in which the camera is perfectly still. I mean, sure, this part of the film wasn't perfect. Hattie Hook's performance as the sister/friend was incredibly annoying. Plot elements don't always gel together as smoothly as they should, and yeah, I'd be lying if I said that I felt the sex scene didn't really need to be there. I think it would have been more interesting if the film didn't answer for us just how far the two went, but overall, it's a decently written film that, while yes, is about two guys trying to discover what their relationship with each other is primarily about the sexual exploration of our main character, and it does that part pretty well, while shrouding a lot of his motivations in mystery and intrigue. But then we get to the film's third act, and this is where the film completely loses me. The film suddenly jumps ahead like 10 years where they reunite for the first time since that night, and then they have a brief conversation where they play catch-up before there's some kind of third act conflict that causes them to be angry at each other. This last 20 to 25 minute segment is a totally unneeded epilogue, especially since they don't really do anything with it. Not only is it largely unnecessary and detracts from the haunting forbidden aura in the first hour or so, but it completely recontextualizes the relationship in a manner that feels unsatisfying. At first, the film seems to be treating the relationship as more of a sexual awakening brought about by a fling rather than them actually falling in love. But then when it jumps ahead over 10 years, the film shifts its focus to try to say that, yes, it was true love, and now they both truly regret not being able to be together. Like, one of the guys gets all angry when he finds out that the other is married, like he somehow expected him to just wait around for him and not settle down with the partner, or they would just pick right back up where they left off as if nothing happened. But I never saw this film as even attempting to be a love story. I thought it was supposed to be a character study of Cole's discovery of his sexual identity, which is why he is our central character that appears in every scene, and that's also why most of the shots were focused on close-ups of the guys one at a time, not together in medium shots. Maybe if the film had more time to explore what that one night they spent together meant to each other, and how it changed them, that could be something. But instead it feels so rushed, and so the film has to take a lot of shortcuts to streamline it, so it just winds up falling back on cliches. The only way I could see this working is if this was like a sequel or a part 2 that got released sometime later and they had more time to actually explore this properly. It's not like the ending is terrible, because in a vacuum it's not. It's just that it kind of undercuts what it had built up prior, and as a result it lessens the impact of its opening hour. All the tension, all the subtle air of danger, all the intrigue that had been built up suddenly winds up completely deflated, and the film ends on a whimper rather than a bang. No pun intended. Of an Age isn't terrible. It's clear the director had a purpose and a vision in mind, and he communicates his ideas and themes effectively. It's just that he unintentionally winds up weakening what had come before, and so as a whole, the product just falls flat. Of an Age gets a half-empty shot. Next up is the new offering from Apple TV, and that's the con artist thriller Sharper. I don't really want to go into too much of the plot, because part of the fun of these kind of movies is going in as blind as possible and letting you be surprised. So I'm going to keep this review as brief as possible. In short, it's very enjoyable. The film manages to keep you guessing with some fun twists. Nothing groundbreaking in here, but they're executed decently, and the film's own structure goes a long way in building the suspense as you watch this house of cards be set up. And the film's pacing is pretty smooth, letting the subsequent reveals fall into place at just the right time. It's very well shot, the film has a sleek look about itself, and the characters are good, solid characters. So I was greatly enjoying myself at letting myself be fooled up until about the last 10 to 15 minutes. For as fun and twisty as the film was up to that point, then we got to a certain scene and suddenly I figured out what the big twist was going to be, and yep, I was right. I figured it out like 6 or 7 minutes before it was actually revealed to the audience. And yeah, that's disappointing, because you want the big reveal at the end to be your biggest surprise, especially when up to that point, the film had actually done a pretty good job of keeping me on my toes and kind of shocking me a little bit. So to go with the obvious ending did feel weak. But does this predictable ending damage what came before it? In my opinion, no, but I can see a lot of people walking away from this feeling a little bit cheated. Maybe if they'd added an extra twist on top of it, I think that it would have helped to make it go down easier. But like I said, I simply enjoyed the film too much up to that point to say that it ruins the film. And it's not like the ending is bad, it is ultimately a satisfactory conclusion, it's just one that you can see coming. It's not exactly a fumble, it's more like having to settle for a field goal instead of being able to get in for the touchdown. So yeah, overall this is a real slick and enjoyable film whose composition does a good job at keeping you in the dark and is led by great performances by a talented cast. But like I said, a lot of people are going to hate the ending, and I don't blame them for doing so. For me, it just knocks it down a peg. This isn't going to redefine the con artist genre, but I think it's a more than adequate attempt, and I was entertained by it, and sometimes that's all I'm asking for. Sharper gets a strong half-full shot. And our final film tonight is the new South Korean thriller Unlocked, a film that, while it does have a slow start, starts picking up the momentum, and by the end of the day, does work. The film stars Woo Hee-chun as a young woman whose life gets thrown into disarray when she loses her cell phone one day and a dangerous psychopath played by Si-Wai Yim gets a hold of it. Using it, he's able to learn everything about her, and he uses all that information to make her life a living hell. One thing that really stuck out to me most was the premise itself. This actually seems like something that could conceivably happen, and honestly, that's what makes it so scary, the plausibility of it all. We rely a lot on our phones, and so we put so much of ourselves into it. So if someone were to look inside it, they could probably learn a great deal about us and potentially use that information against us. While the scenario presented in the film is obviously an exaggeration, like the absolute worst case scenario of this happening, it is kind of sobering to think about the kind of damage that someone could do to someone else if they were really hell-bent on doing it. And on that note, I do kind of like that we never get an explanation for why the villain is doing it. Sometimes people are just really obsessive and crazy, and they can't be explained through rational thought. But anyway, the film's premise is definitely solid, but a film is only good if it actually does something with it. And as a thriller, I'd say it's pretty good. Now let me start off by saying that yes, this film does take its time setting up the dominoes to be knocked down later, and that part could have definitely been sped up a little bit. And in fact, the first 10 minutes were pretty confusing to me. The film kept cutting back between the setup for the main conflict and the police investigation and this random murder that almost seems disconnected. And it was so poorly set up that I initially thought that it was the main character's dead body, but no, it was the antagonist's previous murder victim. And to be frank, the entire police subplot almost feels like it's from a completely different movie. But the film really starts to hit its stride once the villain finally sets his plan into motion. Once that happens, the film turns on. Suddenly, the main character has this sense of paranoia and dread that looms over her, almost as if she feels like she can't escape the situation that she's in, and it's communicated really effectively. It also helps that Woo Hee-chun's performance in this is pretty good. She manages to bring a sense of likability to what's a relatively archetypal character. This is a film that keeps you on your toes, as it then turns into a game of cat and mouse and manages to elicit chills from the simplest of actions. One of the more effective ones was when two characters are having a private conversation, and then it suddenly cuts to a computer screen reminding us that they're being watched all the time. It's very effective. The pacing's mostly good, I was never bored, the climax is really nasty and spine-tingling, and by the end I did care what happened to these characters, even though they weren't the best developed or anything like that. So yeah, overall the film is an effective thriller. Do I wish the film explored the concept a little bit more in depth? Yes. Do I wish the police subplot was better integrated into the story? Also yes. But was this an intriguing, paranoia-laced thriller that also manages to double as a subtle cautionary fable? That's a yes. Not perfect, but just fine. Unlocked gets a half-full shot. And now here's a quick recap of what I thought of the films reviewed for the week of February 17th, 2023. A disappointing half-empty shot for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. A film that has a really fantastic villain but is so overstuffed that it hardly matters. The film is currently in wide release. An empty shot for Marlowe, where a miscast Liam Neeson flounders through a completely flavorless and disjointed noir. The film is currently in wide release. A half-empty shot for Of an Age, a film that would have worked as a story about a guy coming to grips with his sexuality, until it tacks on a totally unnecessary coda. The film is currently in limited release. A half-full shot for Sharper, a slick, sleek con artist thriller with enough surprising twists and turns to keep the story moving that doesn't quite stick the landing as well as it should. The film is currently available for streaming on Apple TV. And finally, a half-full shot for Unlocked, a largely effective thriller that doubles as a cautionary tale about our over-reliance on our phones. The film is currently available for streaming on Netflix. So, I didn't like anything that was released in theaters this week, and I enjoyed the streaming ones that I saw. If you have to go out to the theater, Ant-Man and the Wasp is the best of the bunch, which is the one that you would have likely gone to see anyway. But yeah, I enjoyed both Sharper and Unlocked. They're both good, solid little thrillers that you can just sit down and enjoy on a late evening. And remember, if you want to see my early thoughts of any film that I watch or to read more of my reviews, make sure to check out my Letterboxd account. The link to that is in the description below. That's it for this week. Next time, a black bear goes on a drug-fueled rampage in Cocaine Bear, and Kelsey Grammer is a preacher in the 1970s who opens his church to a group of teenage hippies in Jesus Revolution. Make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss any upcoming episodes. Have a good day. and I'll see you next weekend.